On the 19th of August 2022, the Royal Moroccan Football Federation sacked manager Vahid Halilhodzic with just fewer than 100 days until the 2022 FIFA World Cup. With expectation dampened heading into the tournament and having the likes of Belgium and Croatia in their group, they would surely not reach the last 16. However, this isn't what transpired, as new manager Walid Regragui guided his nation to the World Cup semi-finals for the first time, brushing past some major nations in the process. But how did they do it? How did a nation barely able to qualify for the World Cup, with a manager the press were labelling Mr Avocado Head, end up in the final four of football's most grandiose competition? Ladies and gentlemen, join me as we delve through the archives once again to unpack the story of Morocco, Africa's first World Cup semi-finalists. Our story begins in Kaliningrad, Russia, in 2018. Morocco have just been knocked out of the World Cup, the first one they've appeared at since 1998. Drawn alongside Spain, Portugal and Iran, it was going to be utterly imperative for the North African nation to be at their very best. However, after they lost their opening match to Iran, the one they just had to win, it was always going to be an uphill battle. A loss followed to Portugal when on the last day they picked up a credible, but albeit irrelevant, draw against Spain. It saw them finish bottom of the group and it saw them have to return to Africa a defeated country. But positives had to be found. This was their first World Cup in 20 years. The defeats they suffered were both slender, and actually in the matches they played they were entertaining, dashing the ball up the pitch quickly in a tactical version of hot potato. And now, crucially, they had experience at the most competitive tournament in international football. But for now, they returned to the continent, and next was the 2019 African Cup of Nations. A tricky group was drawn for them, featuring Côte d'Ivoire, Namibia and South Africa. Morocco's record here, though, was a perfect one. 3 wins from 3. Although it must be stated that all 3 wins here were by 1-0. The tempo that had been seen in the 2018 World Cup appeared to have waned slightly. In the knockout round, they were drawn against Benin, who were unbeaten in the competition, but also winless as they drew all 3 group matches. Morocco surprisingly fell behind in this one early in the second half, but recovered for a Youssef en-nesyri strike. Nevertheless, the serial drawers of Benin kept up their streak as they forced the match to penalties. Here, both goal scorers en-nesyri and Sofiane Boufal missed their spot kicks, and the North African nation were eliminated in the round of 16. Two-time AFCON winning coach Hervé Renard accepted responsibility for this defeat, stating how they couldn't handle a low block. A few days after the tournament, Renard resigned as manager, and Morocco would have to start again from square one. Vahid Halilhodzic came in as the man to replace Hervé Renard, who had previously managed Algeria, Côte d'Ivoire and Japan. After assuring 2021 AFCON qualification, attention soon turned towards qualification for the 2022 World Cup. Qualification from Africa for the World Cup is split into 3 rounds. The first of which is more of a preliminary round for lower ranked nations, of which Morocco had already received a bye into round 2. Round 2 itself sees 40 teams split into 10 groups of 4, with the winners going through to round 3. Morocco here were drawn into Group H alongside Guinea, Guinea-Bissau and Sudan. The Atlas Lions made simple work of this though, as they scored 20 goals, conceding just once, and won all 6 group matches. They would be heading to round 3 to play a 2-legged affair against another round 2 group winner, with the victor of that qualifying for the 2022 World Cup. But before we get to that, we have the small matter of 2021's African Cup of Nations. That's right, Morocco headed south towards Cameroon for the 33rd iteration of the African Cup of Nations. Grouped here alongside Comoros, Gabon and Ghana, the Arab nation were keen to seek out top spot in the group. And in this endeavour they were successful, winning their opening 2 matches and drawing the final match versus Gabon to reach the summit of Group C. Their last 16 opponents were Malawi, making their first ever knockout round appearance. After initially falling behind just 7 minutes in, the favourites recovered to a 2-1 victory in the 90. Next though was a real contender for the AFCON crown in Egypt, and this is often where Morocco had come unstuck when facing the bigger nations. Could they prove though that they had grown, that they were now able to compete amongst Africa's elite? The answer was no. Despite leading early through a penalty, they were second best for much of the game as Egypt turned the game on its head and won 2-1. It left many Moroccans feeling that maybe the best course of action was to change coaches once again. And just a few days after defeat, Hakeem Ziyech, whom Halilhodzic had refused to call up for the tournament, announced his retirement from the national team, aged just 28. Which disappointed many fans back home. It all felt like a crisis was brewing, but with 2022 World Cup qualification just round the corner, they had to paper over those cracks to be ready in time. Less than 2 months after their defeat at AFCON, the World Cup qualifier was here. The Atlas Lions drew DR Congo, the lowest ranked nation, in the draw. After the debacle of AFCON and the precarious nature of the manager, it was utterly imperative that Morocco didn't experience a double dose of disappointment. The first leg was away in Kinshasa with high heat and high humidity. 10 minutes in, DR Congo went ahead through Yohan Wissa, whose header deflected into the net. It was the worst possible start as Morocco went into half-time 1-0 down. Early in the second half though, Morocco were awarded a penalty, but Ryan May fired over the bar. As the match ticked on, the North Africans pushed for an equaliser, which came 15 minutes from time, prevented an away defeat and crucially gave confidence as they headed back to Casablanca. In the second leg, the pressure really was on. The manager was under fire, the players had not yet delivered for their nation, and the fans were expectant. Could they deliver this time around? The answer was an emphatic yes. A 4-1 drubbing of DR Congo was enacted in front of a raucous Moroccan crowd. The doubters had been silenced, and surely now Halilhodzic's job was safe.
The Moroccan Football Federation announced the sacking of coach Vahid Halilhodzic.
That's right. In August of 2022, just 3 months before the start of the FIFA World Cup, Morocco chose to relieve their manager of his duties. The decision was largely supported within the kingdom for a multitude of reasons. Firstly, the persistent fallings out with key players such as Hakimi and Ziyech were impacting the performance of the team. Secondly, the inconsistencies on the tactical front were bemusing to say the least, from changing the formation during the middle of AFCON to benching informed players. No one ever knew where they stood. And lastly, his conduct in interviews did not endear himself to the supporters or to the media. But still, even with all of this in mind, it was still a very bold decision to take with the World Cup right around the corner. Picking the right replacement was imperative to ensuring that the 2022 World Cup showing wouldn't be dismal. Step forward, Walid Regragui, the prototypical new breed of African manager, young, media savvy, with a strength in man management. He came into the job having just won the Moroccan Premier Division and the African Champions League in his first season at Wydad AC. Yet some pundits within Morocco were still not happy with the decision. They had expected a bigger name and contemptuously nicknamed him Mr Avocado Head. He had 3 months to win over his critics, a very limited window in order to get things right, but he was boosted by the return of Hakeem Ziyech, who made himself available for selection once again. How would the team look ahead of the competition? Morocco would line up at the World Cup donning a 4-3-3 formation. It was a far cry from their previous 5-3-2, which saw them soak up a lot of pressure and play direct. The 4-3-3 on the other hand was all about transitions. Hakimi and Mazraoui on the overlap, Ziyech and Boufal cutting in, Amrabat anchoring, and en-nesyri incessantly running. Talk about a potential lack of goals were not at panic stations, but were being spoke about ahead of the tournament. Their fans always travel well, and with a sizable North African crowd in Qatar, things were looking up. But how were the other nations in Morocco's group shaping up? Belgium were the first team to look at, who were undoubtedly the favourites for the group. Led by former Swansea, Wigan and Everton manager Roberto Martinez, the Spaniard had guided Belgium to third at the previous World Cup, and the nation were ranked second in the world rankings heading into the tournament. However, the mood amongst the nation was turning against Martinez somewhat, and the team was beginning to show signs of age. Heading into the tournament, Vertonghen, Alderweireld, Witsel and Hazard were all looking weathered, yet were still key members of the lineup. But with truly world-class players in the likes of Courtois and Kevin De Bruyne and Romelu Lukaku, anything was possible for them. Canada was next, making their first World Cup appearance since 1986. The nation was seen as the whipping boys of the group, but they still had some tools in their armour. Alphonso Davies is undeniably rapid and a menace to deal with on the counter, and their front two of Kyle Larin and Jonathan David had a combined 22 goals in qualifying. Outside of these three though, the quality dipped slightly more, and they would have to overperform to get anything out of this group. Last in this group was Croatia. Much was known about their technically skilled midfield featuring Modric, Kovacic and Brozovic, but age seemed to be catching up with them too. Mandzukic had gone and Perisic was well into his 30s coming into this one. Zlatko Dalic remained at the helm, the man who had led Croatia to an astounding World Cup final just 4 years earlier. Repeating their past successes seemed unlikely in this one, but you could never count the Blazers out. Morocco opened their tournament account taking on former World Cup finalists Croatia. The match was being played in a sweltering Al Bayt stadium, which may explain the lack of chances in this one. It finished goalless with neither side threatening anything major. The Atlas Lions were resolute in their defending and neither side could be too unhappy with a draw. Elsewhere, Belgium beat Canada by 1-0. And it would be Martinez's men who would be next up for Morocco. Avoiding defeat here would be preferential, with the most winnable game coming in their last one against Canada. But Walid's men did better than that as they overcame Belgium in a 2-0 win. Belgium had looked concerning in their win over Canada, winning rather fortuitously, and here against Morocco, they were ponderous again. And as highlighted in the build-up, the North Africans were all about transitions, as they caused the aging Belgium defence all manner of problems in the second half. But all in all, it was a hugely eye-catching result for Morocco and meant they only had to get a draw over Canada to qualify for the next round. In the final match, the Atlas Lions started fast, finding themselves 2-0 up 20 minutes in with Ziyech and en-nesyri on target. Canada would pull one back, but Morocco were happy to sit in and soak up the pressure as they won 2-1 and topped the group. A monumental achievement for a nation who just 4 years earlier were winless in the 2018 World Cup. How would they get on in the unfamiliar territory of the knockouts? Following an astounding group win by Japan, it would be Spain that Morocco would have to take on in the last 16. Their form had been inconsistent in the group to say the least, from beating Costa Rica 7-0 in the opening match to losing to Japan in their final match, which nearly saw them eliminated. But nevertheless, they had made it, and they would certainly be seen as the favourites over Morocco. The match went how you'd expect for the most part. Spain dominated large swaths of possession, whilst Morocco sat in and looked to spring a counter whenever they were feeling plucky enough. In fact, Spain were such ball hoggers in this one that they actually completed over 1,000 passes here. But as for goals, neither side could find a breakthrough and the match ran all the way through to penalties. Here, Morocco goalie Yassine Bounou, affectionately named Bono, became a hero. He saved 2 penalties in the shootout as Hakimi netted the winner, ironically as the PSG right-back spent his childhood in Madrid. It was an astounding win for Morocco, a first ever one over Spain, one that the new coach had to take immense credit for. From one Iberian nation to another, it would be Portugal in the quarterfinals. Fernando Santos' men were going well when the draw thrust them together with Morocco in the last 8. They had navigated a group full of banana skins and came out on top with 2 wins and a loss to South Korea, although they were already through by the time that match had taken place. The last 16 though was where Portugal really came to life as they annihilated Switzerland in a 6-1 victory with Ramos firing a hat-trick. Similarly to the Spain match, Morocco deployed similar tactics of sitting in and looking to transition at rapid pace. Youssef en-nesyri opened the scoring at the tail end of the first half, rising highest to notch past Diogo Costa. In the second half, Portugal turned to their bench, bringing on Cristiano in search of an equaliser. But Morocco had been stoic all tournament and were not about to stop now. Despite injuries aplenty for Regragui to attend to, the North Africans held on to their 1-goal lead, and Cristiano had to settle that the World Cup would always elude him. I mean, probably. It's Cristiano Ronaldo, he might carry on for another 10 years yet. But let's be serious for a moment. For years, Morocco had been peering over the Strait of Gibraltar, watching the successes of their Iberian neighbours, partly in adulation, but also in envy too. The North Africans, once ignored and belittled, were now being heard in every corner of the globe, as the world observed them dispatch two of the most successful European nations of all time. From managerless to Mbappe, the Atlas Lions will be facing France in the semis. Having faced one of the 2018 World Cup finalists already, they were about to face the other, in Le Bleus. Having topped the group, then sauntered past Poland and finally limped past England, France were on course to win back-to-back World Cups. Morocco, on the other hand, were flying high, but injuries were beginning to catch up with them. Naif Agurd was initially named in the starting 11 of this one, but had to withdraw with injury. And this unsettlement in the backline did Morocco no favours, as they fell behind 5 minutes in to a Theo Hernandez scrambled finish. Things went from bad to worse in the way of injuries, as Romain Saiz was also subbed before the half-time whistle. In spite of this though, the Moroccan support remained unyielding, and chances soon followed that Hugo Lloris had to be equal to. Eventually though, the colossal attempt from the Atlas Lions became undone, as Kolo Muani put the game beyond doubt. It had proven to be one game too many, but nevertheless their legacy was in place. The first Arab and African nation to reach the semi-finals of the World Cup, and there was still the small matter of the third place playoff against a familiar opponent to come. Yes, that's right. In the third place playoff they'd be taking on their group opponents of Croatia, whom they had drawn against in the opening match of the tournament. They had overcome Japan and Brazil earlier in the knockouts, marking another memorable tournament for them. This match started off lively as Guardiola nodded home Perisic's smart flick on from a routine straight off the training ground. However, an equaliser was found almost immediately as the ball dropped to replacement centre-half Dari, who coolly finished. The winner would come before the half-time whistle had even sounded, as Orsic curled an effort past Bono in the Morocco net. The nation would have to settle for fourth, but the crowd in the stadium didn't seem to mind, who was still in the carnival spirit. They were full of love and support for their players and staff for giving them the best World Cup of all time, one that couldn't be equalled by any African country. The redemption arcs from the front three felt written by a Hollywood script. En-Nesyri and Boufal infamously missed penalties to send Morocco home from AFCON, and Ziyech had retired from the national team less than a year earlier, yet here they were, starring on the biggest stage of them all. Thoughts also had to be with Vahid Halilhodzic. He was deeply unpopular within Morocco at the time of his departure, but you can't help but feel sorry that the man that led them to the World Cup never got to coach them at the tournament. And lastly, Walid Regragui. What an impact. In such a short space of time, he transformed this Moroccan team from timid and downtrodden to absolute gladiators. The impact of this footballing achievement on the nation of Morocco has been tenfold. From smashing stereotypes to unifying Arabs across the region, the national team had tons of reasons to be proud of themselves. "I love you, Mum," were the words left by Ashraf Hakimi under his mother's Instagram photo following the Spain triumph. Boufal danced with his on the pitch after beating Portugal. In a time when Muslim men can be vilified and Muslim women are often typecast, this was a welcome change to see in pictures that went global. 6 months after the triumph of the Men's World Cup, the Moroccan women's team headed for their first ever World Cup, where they recovered from an opening day defeat to qualify for the knockouts. It really was quite an unprecedented year for Moroccan football. But it was more than that. The support for this nation at the 2 World Cups transcended borders, languages, ethnic backgrounds and smaller divisions within the local communities. How they kick on now though will be the ultimate litmus test of legacy for the North Africans. Looking to the future, Morocco will feature quite heavily in the international football calendar. Later this year, Morocco will be hosting the Women's African Cup of Nations. In 2025, it will host the Men's African Cup of Nations before co-hosting the 2030 World Cup alongside Spain and Portugal. The culture of football within the country had always been there, but the barriers to entry, particularly for women, were now rapidly falling. The nation is united behind their national teams where previously club football had dominated. For the Atlas Lions though, success needs to be forthcoming. They haven't won the Cup of Nations since 1976, which is utterly absurd for a nation with the African World Cup record. And who knows, success at AFCON may springboard into success at their home World Cup in 2030. What we do know though is football in Morocco, in Africa, in the Arab world, amongst Muslims, is alive and kicking. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching.